Hi, I'm Warrick from Harder Steenbeck, and today we're going to be sharing a video with you that I can guarantee, whatever your level, is going to help you to improve your airbrush technique. Even if you've got a lot of experience with the airbrush, these techniques I find just help to center you before a session if you're very experienced and prepare you to make your best work when you start working on the things that really matter. And if you're earlier in your creative journey, these techniques will help you to learn how to get the most from your airbrush and get to the point where it starts to feel like you've got muscle memory over it, like it's an extension of your arm, like you can control it to produce exactly what you can see creatively. So let's start out with the very, very basics of how to get the best control from your airbrush. In other words, how to hold it. Now, I'm not here to tell you that you should or shouldn't hold it in a certain way. This is just my experience over working with the airbrush for about 30 years of my life. What I have found is that generally speaking, the closer we can get to the instinctive way to hold something, the better. And the thing that we all started out learning fine control with as children were pens, pencils, brushes. The more we can hold the airbrush like a pen, like a pencil, like a brush, the quicker it will start to feel instinctive to us. So to me, what that means is that you want to pick the airbrush up, keep your hand fairly relaxed, don't bunch your hand up like this, keep it fairly open, let this finger be like a pointer. This really helps with aiming. The straighter you can keep your trigger finger, the more it's like pointing at what you want to paint. So with that out the way, let's get into some other aspects of how to control your airbrush as optimally as possible. Now, just to deal with the basics, the most basic of the basics, you have to understand with the airbrush trigger, there's two actions on a double action airbrush trigger. One, down, is what opens and closes your airflow. The back and forward is what proportionally opens and closes your paint flow. Now, if you're starting up with us and you've got the Ultra, the cool thing about the Ultra is that it's engineered to teach you the double action process. So you don't really need to learn it. A lot of people, when they're starting out, they struggle with this muscle memory of needing to push down first, then pull back, then push forward, then release. It's very important that you do that sequence. The Ultra is engineered so that if you haven't pushed the trigger down, you can't pull it back. It will only go back after you've pressed it down. Then it'll come back. And now I'm going to share an absolute golden secret with you about getting started with the airbrush. Let's say there's two things you've got to learn. You've got to learn about the airbrush and you've got to learn about the paint. Now, if you can separate those two things and learn one at a time, it makes the whole starting up process so much more pleasurable. What I'd really advise you to do, no matter what stage you're at, if you've bought a new airbrush, whether you're a beginner buying the Ultra, progressing painter buying the Evolution, or an advanced painter buying the Infinity, start out with a piece of artist paper or just some paper, come to that, and some food coloring. Now, the thing about food coloring that's so delightful is that it's a water-soluble color. In other words, it doesn't dry on the tip of the needle. You can paint and paint and paint to your heart's content, and you're never going to need to worry about managing any tip dry or any clogging issues. The cool thing about that is it means you can sit down for an hour or two and just paint seamlessly and discover the feel of this new airbrush that you have. What pressure should I set up on the compressor to feed my airbrush? Now, there is a simple answer to this, and you can get through almost everything you're ever going to need to do with this answer. 25 to 28 psi, or 1.8 bar to 2 bar, roughly. That pressure is going to not over-energize your airbrush, but it's going to give you sufficient power to atomize almost any paint really, really well. What I would say is it does depend on the stage that you're at in your journey of learning how to airbrush. If you're in the beginner to intermediate phase, I would strongly advise you not to play with pressure. The reason is because if you're adjusting too many parameters at once, it's very difficult to get a foothold on learning how to airbrush. You're constantly adjusting and modulating the trigger, you're constantly adjusting and modulating the distance from the object and the speed that you're moving across it. Adding air pressure into that as well almost makes it unlearnable. I know that you're going to hear people saying, this is better with a lower pressure, that's better with a higher pressure. These are details. They're small improvements, incremental. If you're at that beginner to intermediate phase, just set your air pressure 25 to 28, keep it there. This constancy enables you to learn the other aspects of airbrush performance, paint preparation in a really ordered way, and it will really help you to progress much faster. For example, Here we have the evolution on the 0.45 setup. I've got it set up at about 27 psi right now. And what you can see is that anything that I want to do, from a background spray to some points, to a little bit of detail work, coming back out to bigger work, to dagger strokes, all of that is accomplished acceptably well with that 27 psi setting. Let's start out with the primer. When you are loading a paint into your airbrush, as a good lazy man, I'm going to, of course, mix the color in the cup of the airbrush. And the way to make that easy is to drop the thinner in first. So I'm going to put in 5 drops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to drop the primer in on top of that. The reason why I put the primer in second is because I don't want the thicker fluid to go all the way down to the fine tip of the airbrush. I want that to be the thinner. So I've got my 1-to-1 mix done. Mixing in the cup on the Ultra, you can do it with something physical, like the end of a paintbrush. I know that some of you like to do it by bubble back, but for beginners, this is a little bit more of a complicated method. So for my money, it's just super easy just to get the back end of a paintbrush and just basically poke it in there a few times, and that mixes it up good enough for what we're doing here. Couple of pulls on the trigger to get that flowing. Test it on your fingernail or a nearby piece of paper if you wish, just to get a feel for it. And here we see we've got some beautiful primer flowing out the front of the airbrush. I've got some Army Painter primer already developed in the airbrush here. And what we're going to do is, again, just look at our very, very basic of basics on the trigger technique. So, first thing I want you to do, on a piece of paper, press down to start the air, start moving the airbrush and pull the trigger back to start the paint flow. Push it forward to stop it, and then stop the air. That's the most basic trigger stroke there is. Now let's look at how we build up a panel. The first stroke, about a fist distance away, pretty reasonable pullback. If you want to use the prime setting, do. Otherwise, just use a free trigger. The next stroke you want to make, you want to aim at the edge of that strip with the center of the next stroke. And the same with the next. Same with the next. Same with the next. Same with the next. And what that gives us is this very uniform coverage on this area that we've been painting. Now the reason for this is every airbrush, when it paints, it has a cone which is most concentrated in the middle, progressively degrades to the outer edges. So if you've got that spray pattern, and you want to make sure that your coverage is perfectly even on that panel, you don't want to do it so that you've got one spray pattern here and the next one there. If you do one here and the next one 50% overlap and 50% overlap, it evens everything out absolutely perfectly on the panel. And so the first stroke you put down should not be wet enough that you can't get a bit more paint onto it. So what you always want to look for whenever you're priming is you want to look for a nice satin finish. You don't want to get it looking too glossy, because when it's too glossy, you run the risk of having the paint start to go mobile on the surface, and then ultimately you can get runs and things like that, and you just don't want that at all. So you just want to get it looking fairly satin-like, not super wet, and that'll be just perfect. Also, I do think that I often hear people not wanting to over-thin the primer because they focus on coverage, and I tend to look at it quite differently to that. My focus when I'm putting on a primer is I just want to make sure that I prime that surface nicely so I've got a good base for the colors that are going to follow. But what I don't want to do is I really do not want to fill any of the surface detail in, because what are you paying for when you buy these beautiful models? You're paying for the molding. So why would you want to paint it in such a way that you compromise that molding? You definitely don't want to do that. You want to not lose any surface detail whatsoever. And that's one of the great strengths of the airbrush. So do not over apply on your primer. Just remember, all you're looking to do with the primer is you're just looking to condition the surface for what is to follow. That's all you're trying to do. So think of it like surface conditioning more so than putting a big old fat coat of paint down on there. My process for changing color is to get the trusty cleaning pot, Dock the airbrush in there, get rid of whatever color is still in the airbrush, just spray it out. You'll hear the sound change when the color runs out. There you go. You hear it starting to suck air down through the cup. Drop a little bit of cleaner into the cup, just a tiny bit, and then pick up these little squares of kitchen towel that I like to have prepared on the side, and just push it in there with your pinky finger. All of our cups are now shaped to accommodate the average human pinky finger, so that you can get it in there and get most of the color out just by scooping it out with the paper towel. Drop a little bit more cleaner in there. Get some of it sprayed through the airbrush, and once you've got a couple of seconds sprayed through, you then want to do a bubble back. So pinch the front of the airbrush, press down, pull back a slight bit, not too much, otherwise it'll shoot all over the place, just a very small pull back. And that will push any paint that's in this front part back up into the cup, mix it with the cleaner. Spray that through, you're nearly done. Again, the sound will change. You know you're done. I always pump the trigger to clean the full length of the needle. Drop one more batch of cleaner in there, and this is where you want to pick up your big old paintbrush, smoosh it around in there a bit, just make sure you've cleaned the whole interior of that cup. You can then also just remove any color that might be on the head. You don't have to be careful because the bristles are really long. And again, spray it out whilst pumping the trigger, like that. And if you're super impatient, like me, you can just dump the rest of it into the non-drinking cup that you keep nearby to your painting process. And after that, just a quick wipe with the paper towel. Always pinch forwards off the airbrush, and in that way you'll never damage the needle. And that, for me, is a between color change done. So don't overdo the cleaning, just interrupts your creative flow. That's really all that you need to do in between colors. If you do that even through a whole day of painting, your end of day routine will be about 5 minutes. Thanks for being with us. If you know anybody that could use this information and find it helpful, please be the person that takes the time to share it with them. Other than that, thank you for being with us, and we'll see you on the next one.